This week in post, processing a daytime long exposure. Hi everyone, I'm Scott Davenport. Welcome to In Post and thanks for joining me today. I'm going to do a photo teardown of a photo I shared earlier this week on In the Field. This is a long exposure that I took during the daytime out at the Sunset Cliffs area, and it's something that kind of opened my eyes where I can do more long exposure work even if it is very bright out. So let's have a look at this photo and we'll break it down and I'll show you the major steps that went into creating it. Here's the original photo. Nothing has changed, and I'm going to show you the final photo right here. So a pretty drastic transformation. It's cleaned up, a lot of that haze is gone. Let's walk through everything here. So the original photo, very first thing was cropping, so tightening in a little bit, and changing the profile to Adobe Landscape. Now as for the crop, why did I do that? This was actually me attempting to mimic a photo I'd taken a few weeks prior. And if you watched In the Field, you know what I'm talking about. So the crop wasn't really any compositional reasons or needs. This was just to get as close as I could to a previous photo. Next was some spot removal. Now there's a few problems here. You notice that there's some flares here. So I did not do a good enough job of shielding the sun from my filters and the typical sensor dust that's going on. So started work on that with this next step. And so we see some of the flares are removed. There was a spot there. And as we'll see, there's still some more work to be done in that flare space. But this was the first start. You know, as you add more contrast or saturation or so forth, sometimes you have to go revisit spot removal or any other cleanup. And we got into processing. So the basic panel, we're going to see a much more drastic change here. Here are the sliders. You know, exposure was good, healthy amount of contrast, bumping up the whites, really bringing that black point down. There was a lot of haze in this, and so I wanted to get these darker rocks to be really dark. I did work the dehaze slider, but I didn't push it too far. Now something that dehaze tends to do is if you push it too far, it starts to introduce some odd coloring, and usually it tends to be in the purple range. I'm going to try and see if I just pop it really high here. You can see what I mean there. That's not getting too purple because we're still in pretty broad daylight, but in these shadow areas on my monitor I can see hints of purple in there, and maybe you can even see it here in this water. So pushing dehaze too far, I'm not a big fan of that, but to cut down on what was a very hazy scene to begin with, it's handy, it's useful, so use it in moderation. Now next, once I've done these basic adjustments, we can see here I'm starting to see more of some flares. There's another one out over here that kind of reared its head, got some stuff up in here. So I did some more flare cleanup. Now what am I doing with this cleanup? How is all this working? It's just the spot removal tool, and I press just hover over here. And some of these are single clicks, and some of these are brush strokes or swipes or swatches of areas. And I tend to work on a flare in pieces, so I'll do a portion of the flare, like here's like the underside of one, and this is probably another one where it's like the top side of it. Kind of working around those edges to just smooth those things out. Because at least in this particular photo, most of the coloration was fine. This wasn't a color flare. It was really just more of a change in luminance. So I was able to smooth those edges out and just take away the obviousness of those flares there. Let's turn off our spot removal and move on with the next step, which was to bring out the cliffs more. So pop the cliffs up here a little bit. We'll see that those got deeper in orange, a little crisper. That is our HSL work. We're adding a little blue. So did that work? And it's the oranges that was the main thing here. Darkening the orange, adding a little saturation. I've said this probably 100 times now. When you're doing saturation work, especially in the reds, oranges, and some of the yellows, those tend to be much more sensitive to saturation. So go easy on those. You push them too far, it becomes very, for my taste, over the top, too day glow. So I like to do a light touch on oranges and reds for saturation. Even more flare cleanup was next. I did some further tidying of this area and also some work on the main rock here. I want to go back to the previous step and watch the main rock. It gets a little brighter, it's a little washed out as part of this other flare cleanup that I did. this got darker. And so once again, let's take a look at our brushes this time. And we can see here, I've got a brush that was done over the rock. And that was, if I tap on it, you can see what I'm doing there, adding some contrast, pulling back the highlights, increasing clarity, just getting all of that crispness onto this main subject rock, just making it stand out a little bit more. And now the last step to finalize things, to really draw the eye into that center, a vignette. So we'll look at the vignette here, close that panel down and take a look at the effects panel. We can see it's a subtle vignette, not too dark, not too deep. If I take the feather all the way to 0, you can see where the edge of that vignette is. So I really wanted to affect the corners, and I just decided to have it touch right at the sides here. And as I increase that feather back to where it was, which was about 0, or I should say nominal, not 0, we'll see that nice feather and fade out to get the finished photo. So all added up, here is before, and here is after. For a tip of the week, I think it's flare cleanup, and doing that in stages. So if you've got a scene where you've got some type of lens flare, the first thing you'll need to decide, is there a color shift or is it just a luminance shift? The luminance shifts are easier to deal with. You can do brightness and darkening, and then do just a general blending with a retouch brush. I'm using Lightroom, you could be using On1, you could be using Photoshop, whatever it is, a retouch brush. And if you have a softer background, in this case I had flares over water, that makes your job easier as well. Now, if you have a color in the flare, that's going to take more work. Look at using similar techniques, but also adjusting tint or desaturating to remove, like, green flares or red flares. This isn't to say that lens flares are bad. They can be really cool and very creative depending on the look you're going for. In this scene, I didn't want those flares. They weren't adding to my story. And it's a reminder to me, as maybe another tip for myself for working in the field, is to do a better job of shielding the sides of my filter system. Those big square filters are great. I love using them. But having a hood go around them, I don't have something that large. Maybe I should go get one of those dog collars or something. Yeah, that'd look really cool, huh? But blocking the sun there so I wouldn't have to do as much work in post-processing. And that will do it for this week's In Post. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you did, please let me know somehow. Social shares are always appreciated. Love getting your photo questions. You can leave questions in the video below, or just thoughts or comments you have on anything you saw here. And if you want to keep it private, you can contact me through my website. And I usually turn an answer around in a day or two. And I really cannot stress enough how much I enjoy getting your questions. It makes me think about my photography. Hopefully my answers are helping you out. We both get better together. That's kind of the whole point. Well, until next time, my name's Scott Davenport, and happy shooting.